Lord, I would now put before the tribunal two cases where that order of the 17th of September 1942 was apparently put into effect. The first case is set out at the next document in the document book, which is D645. Lord, I put that document in, and it becomes GB203.
Which document does it follow?
It follows...
I've got it.
Murler's...
Yes, I've got it.
Lord, it's a report of the sinking of a steam trawler, a fishing trawler, the Nuremberg, which was sunk by U-247 on the 5th of July of 1944. The first page of the document contains an extract from the log of the U-boat the time reference 1943 on the document is followed by an account of the firing of two torpedoes which missed. And then at 20:55, the log reads, surfaced, fishing vessels, bearings given of 3 ships, engaged the nearest, she stops after 3 minutes. Then there's an account of a shot fired as the trawler lay stopped. And then the final entry, sunk by flak with shots into her side, sank by the stern. Tribunal will notice there is no mention in the log of any action against the torpedoed or the shipwrecked seaman.
Why is it entered as 5/7/1943?
Lord, that is an error.
An error?
It's a typing error. I should have pointed it out. Lord, the next page of the document is a comment on the action by the U-boat command, and the last line reads, recognized success, fishing vessel Nuremberg sunk by flak. And then there is an affidavit by James McAllister, who was a deckhand on board the Nuremberg at the time of the sinking. Lord, reading the last paragraph on the first page of the affidavit, he has dealt earlier with having seen the torpedo tracks which missed the trawler. And the last paragraph reads, at 21:10 hours, while we were still trawling, The submarine surfaced on our starboard beam, about 50 yards to the northeast of us. And without any warning, immediately opened fire on the ship with a machine gun. We were 18 miles west from Cape Wrath on a northwesterly course, making 3 knots. The weather was fine and clear, sunny with good visibility. The sea was smooth with light airs. So then there is an account of the firing in the next paragraph. And then if I might read from the second paragraph on page 2.
Why not read the first?
If your lordship please. When the submarine surfaced, I saw men climbing out of the conning tower. The skipper thought at first the submarine was British. But when she opened fire, he immediately slackened the brake to take the weight off gear. That is the trawl, my lord. And increased to full speed, which was about 10 knots. The submarine chased us, firing her machine gun, and with the first rounds killed 2 or 3 men, including the skipper, who were on deck and had not had time to take cover. The submarine then started using a heavier gun from her conning tower, the first shot from which burst the boiler, enveloping everything in steam and stopping the ship. By now the crew had taken cover. But in spite of this, all but 4 were killed. The submarine then commenced to circle round ahead of the vessel and passed down her port side with both guns firing continuously. We were listing slowly to port all the time, but did not catch fire. The mate and I attempted to release the lifeboat which was aft, but the mate was killed whilst doing so. So I abandoned the attempt. I then went below into the pantry, which was below the waterline, for shelter. The ship was listing more and more to port, until finally, at 22:10, she rolled right over and sank. And the only 4 men left alive on board were thrown into the sea. I do not know where the other 3 men had taken cover during this time, as I did not hear or see them until they were in the water. I swam around until I came across the broken bow of our lifeboat, which was upside down, and managed to scramble on top of it. Even now, the submarine did not submerge, but deliberately steamed in my direction, and when only 60 to 70 yards away, fired directly at me with a short burst from the machine gun. As their intention was quite obvious, I fell into the water and remained there until the submarine ceased firing and submerged, after which I climbed back onto the bottom of the boat. The submarine had been firing her guns for a full hour. Lord, then the affidavit goes on to describe the deponent and others attempting to rescue themselves and to help each other. And then they were picked up by another trawler. The last paragraph on that page. Whilst on board the Lady Madeline, the second engineer and I had our wounds dressed. I learned later that the second engineer had 48 shrapnel wounds, also a piece of steel wire 2.5 inches long embedded in his body. Well, then there's a sentence on which I don't rely, and the last sentence, I had 14 shrapnel wounds. Lord, and then the last 2 paragraphs of the affidavit. This is my 4th wartime experience, having served in the whalers Sylvester, mined, and New Seville torpedoed, and the trawler Ocean Tide, which ran ashore. As a result of this attack by the U-boat, the casualties were 6 killed, 2 missing, 2 injured. Lord, the next document, D647, I put in as GB 204. Lord, this is an extract from a statement given by the second officer of the ship Antonico, torpedoed, set afire, and sunk on the 28th of September 1942 on the coast of French Guiana. Members of the Tribunal will observe that the date of the incident is some 11 days after the issue of the order. Lord, I would read from the words that the witness saw the dead. It's slightly more than halfway down on the first page. The account has been given of the attack on the ship, which by then was on fire. That the witness saw the dead on the deck of the Antonico as he and his crew tried to swing out their lifeboat. That the attack was fulminant, lasting almost 20 minutes. That the witness, already in the lifeboat, tried to get away from the side of the Antonico in order to avoid being dragged down by the same Antonico, and also because she was the aggressor's target. that the night was dark and it was thus difficult to see the submarine, but that the fire aboard the Antonico lit up the locality in which she was submerging, facilitating the enemy to see the two lifeboats trying to get away. That the enemy ruthlessly machine-gunned the defenseless sailors in number 2 lifeboat, in which the witness found himself, and killed the second pilot, Arnaldo de Andrade de Lima, and wounded 3 of the crew. That the witness gave orders to his company to throw themselves overboard, to save themselves from the bullets. In so doing, they were protected and out of sight behind the lifeboat, which was already filled with water. Even so, the lifeboat continued to be attacked. At that time, the witness and his companions were about 20 meters in distance from the submarine. Lord, I haven't got the U-boat's log in that case, but you may think that in view of the order with regard to entries in logs, namely that anything compromising should not be put in, it would be no more helpful than in the case of the previous incident. Lord, the next document, D646A, I put in as GB 205. It is a monitored account of a talk by a German naval war reporter on the long wave propaganda service from Friesland. The broadcast was in English, and the date is the 11th of March, 1943. It's, if I may quote, Santa Lucia in the West Indies was an ideal setting for romance, but nowadays it was dangerous to sail in these waters. Dangerous for the British and Americans, and for all the colored people who were at their beck and call. Recently, a U-boat operating in these waters sighted an enemy windjammer. Streams of tracer bullets were poured into the sails, and most of the Negro crew leapt overboard. Knowing that this might be a decoy ship, the submarine steamed cautiously to within 20 yards when hand grenades were hurled into the rigging. The remainder of the Negroes then leapt into the sea. The windjammer sank. There remained only wreckage. Lifeboats packed with men and sailors swimming. The sharks in the distance licked their teeth in expectation. Such was the fate of those who sailed for Britain and America. Lord, the next page of the document I don't propose to read. It's an extract from the log of the U-boat believed to have sunk this ship, which was in fact the CS Flight. Lord, I read that because in my submission it shows that it was the policy of the enemy at this time to seek to terrorize crews, and it is a part with the order with regard to rescue ships and with the order on the destruction of seamen. If I might say so, in view of the cross-examination, the prosecution do not complain of rescue ships being attacked. They are not entitled to protection. The point of the order was that they were to be given priority in attack. And the order, therefore, fell into line with the order of the 17th of September, 1942. In view of the Allied building program, it had become imperative to prevent the ships being manned. Lord, I pass to the period after the defendant had succeeded the defendant Raeder. Lord, the next document is 2098 PS. It has been referred to, but not, I think, put in. I put it in formally as GB 206. Lord, I won't read it. It merely sets out that the defendant Raeder should have the equivalent rank of a minister of the Reich, and I ask the tribunal to infer that on succeeding Raeder, the defendant Doenitz would presumably have succeeded to that right.
This is from 1938 onward.
From 1938 onwards, yes. The next document, D648, I put in as GB 207. It is an affidavit by an official or rather it's an official report certified by an official of the British Admiralty. The certificate is on the last page. And it sets out the numbers of meetings, the dates of the meetings, and those present on the occasions of meetings between the defendant Doenitz or his representative with Hitler from the time that he succeeded Raeder until the end. The certificate states, I have compiled from them, that is from captured documents, the attached list of occasions on which Admiral Doenitz attended conferences at Hitler's headquarters. A list of other senior officials who attended the same conferences is added when this information was contained in the captured documents concerned. I certify that the list is a true extract from the collective documents which I have examined and which are in the possession of the British Admiralty, London. Lord, I won't go through the list. I would merely call the tribunal's attention to the fact that either Admiral Doenitz or his deputy, Counter-Admiral Voss, was present at each of these meetings. And that amongst those who were also constantly there were the defendants Speer, Keitel and Jodl, Ribbentrop and Goering, and also Himmler or his lieutenants, Fegelein or Kaltenbrunner. Lord, the inference which I asked the tribunal to draw from the document is that from the time that he succeeded Raeder, this defendant was one of the rulers of the Reich and was undoubtedly aware of all decisions, major decisions of policy. Lord, I pass to the next document, C-178. That has already been put in as United States Exhibit 544. It is an internal memorandum of the Naval War Staff written by the division dealing with international law to another division on the subject of the order with regard to the shooting of commandos of the 18th of October 1942, with which the tribunal are, I think, familiar. The point of the document is that some doubt appeared to have arisen in some quarters with regard to the understanding of the order, and in the last sentence of the memorandum, it suggested, as far as the Navy is concerned, it remains to be seen whether or not this case should be used to make sure, after a conference with the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, that all departments concerned have an entirely clear conception regarding the treatment of members of commando units. Lord, whether that conference took place or not, I do not know. The document is dated some 11 days after this defendant had taken over from the defendant Rader. But the next document in the book, D649, which I put in as GB 208, is an instance of the Navy in July of that year, July 1943, handing over to the SD for shooting Norwegian and British naval personnel whom the Navy decided came under the terms of the order. Lord, it is an affidavit by a British barrister at law who served as judge advocate at the trial of the members of the SD who executed the order. Paragraph 1 sets out that the deponent was judge advocate at the trial of 10 members of the SD by a military court held at the law courts Oslo, Norway, which sat on Thursday, 29th November 1945, and concluded its sittings on Tuesday, 4th December 1945. Lord, the next paragraph sets out who convened the court and the names of the prosecuting and defending counsel. And the third paragraph states that the accused were charged with committing a war crime in that they, at Ulven, Norway, in or about the month of July 1943, in violation of the laws and usages of war, were concerned in the killing, and then there follow the names of 6 Norwegian personnel of the Norwegian Navy, including 1 officer and 1 leading telegraphist of the Royal Navy, prisoners of war. If I might read from paragraph 4. There was evidence before the court which was not challenged by the defense that motor torpedo boat number 345 set out from Lerwick in the Shetlands on a naval operation for the purpose of making torpedo attacks on German shipping off the Norwegian coast, and for the purpose of laying mines in the same area. The persons mentioned in the charge were all the crew of the torpedo boat. Paragraph 5. The defense did not challenge that each member of the crew was wearing uniform at the time of capture, and there was abundant evidence from many persons, several of whom were German, that they were wearing uniform at all times after their capture. Paragraph 6. On the 27th July 1943, torpedo boat reached the island of Aspo off the Norwegian coast north of Bergen. On the following day, the whole of the crew were captured and were taken on board a German naval vessel which was under the command of Admiral von Schrader, the Admiral of the West Coast. The crew were taken to the Bergenhus, where they had arrived by 11 p.m. on the 28th July. The crew were there interrogated by Lieutenant H.P. K.W. Fanger, a naval lieutenant of the reserve, on the orders of Korvettenkapitän Egon Grasher, both of the German Naval Intelligence Service. This interrogation was carried out upon the orders of the staff of the Admiral of the West Coast. Lieutenant Fanger reported to the officer in charge of the intelligence branch at Bergen that in his opinion all the members of the crew were entitled to be treated as prisoners of war, and that officer in turn reported both orally and in writing to the Sea Commander Bergen and in writing to the Admiral of the West Coast. 7. The interrogation by the Naval Intelligence Branch was concluded in the early hours of the 29th July. And almost immediately, all the members of the crew were handed over on the immediate orders of the Sea Commander Bergen to Obersturmbannführer of the SD, Hans Wilhelm Blomberg, who was at that time commander of the Sicherheitspolizei at Bergen. This followed a meeting between Blomberg and Admiral von Schrader, at which a copy of the Führer order of the 18th October 1942 was shown to Blomberg. This order dealt with the classes of persons who were to be excluded from the protection of the Geneva Convention and were not to be treated as prisoners of war, but when captured, were to be handed over to the SD. Admiral Schrader told Blomberg that the crew of this torpedo boat were to be handed over in accordance with the Führer order to the SD. 9. The SD then conducted their own interrogation.
You can summarize the rest, can't you?
If your Lordship pleases. Lord, paragraph 9 describes the interrogation by officials of the SD, and that these officials took the same view as the naval intelligence officers, that the crew were entitled to be treated as prisoners of war, that despite this, they were taken out and shot by an execution squad composed of members of the SD. And then there's a description of the disposal of the bodies. Now, the last paragraph is perhaps important in connection with the case against the defendant, Keitel.
Yes, read it.
And I should read it. That in March or April 1945, an order from the Führer headquarters, signed by Keitel, was transmitted to the German authorities in Norway. The substance of the order was that members of the crew of Commando Ray who fell into German captivity were from that date to be treated as ordinary prisoners of war. This order referred specifically to the Führer order referred to above. Members of the tribunal will, of course, have noted the date. It was time to put their affairs in order. Lord, the next document, C-158, I put in as GB 209, consists of two extracts from minutes of conferences on the 19th and 20th of February, 1945. Conferences between the defendant Doenitz and Hitler. If I might read the first and last sentence of the first extract. The Führer is considering whether or not Germany should renounce the Geneva Convention. That is, of course, the 1929 Prisoners of War Convention. And the last sentence, the Führer orders the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy to consider the pros and cons of this step and to state his opinion as soon as possible. Well, then, at the second extract, the defendant Doenitz states his opinion in the presence of the defendant Jodl and the representative of the defendant Ribbentrop. It's the last two sentences on which I rely. On the contrary, the disadvantages, that is, the disadvantages of renouncing the convention, outweigh the advantages. Even from a general standpoint, it appears to the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy that this measure would bring no advantages. It would be better to carry out the measures considered necessary without warning and at all costs to save face with the outer world. Lord, it is no small matter, that document, when one reflects that it was to that convention that we owe the fact that upwards of 165,000 British and 65 to 70,000 American prisoners of war were duly recovered at the end of the war. And to advocate breaching that convention, preferably without saying so, is not a matter to be treated lightly. Now, the next document, C-171, I put in as GB 210. It's another extract from the minutes of a meeting between the defendant Doenitz and Hitler on the 1st July 1944. The extract is signed by the defendant. Regarding the general strike in Copenhagen, the Führer says that the only weapon to deal with terror is terror. Court-martial proceedings create martyrs. History shows that the names of such men are on everybody's lips. Whereas there is silence with regard to the many thousands who have lost their lives in similar circumstances without court-martial proceedings. Now, the next document, C-195, I put in as GB 211. It is a memorandum signed by the defendant dated late in 1944. There is no specific date on the document, but it is late in 1944, in December, I think, 1944. The distribution on the third page includes Hitler, Keitel, Jodl, Speer, and the Supreme Command of the Air Force. Lord, if I might read the second paragraph. He's dealing with a review of German shipping losses. Furthermore, I propose reinforcing the shipyard working parties by prisoners from the concentration camps. And as a special measure for relieving the present shortage of coppersmiths, especially in U-boat construction, I propose to divert coppersmiths from the construction of locomotives to shipbuilding. Well, then he goes on to deal with sabotage, and the last two paragraphs on that page add, since elsewhere measures for exacting atonement taken against whole working parties, amongst whom sabotage occurred, have proved successful, and, for example, the shipyard sabotage in France was completely suppressed, possibly similar measures for the Scandinavian countries will come under consideration.
Do you need to read any more than that?
Lord, no. The last sentence of the document on the next page, it's item 2 of the summing up. 12,000 concentration camp prisoners will be employed in the shipyards as additional labor. A security service agrees to this. That is the SD. Lord, this man was one of the rulers of Germany. And in my submission, that document alone is sufficient to condemn him. It was not for nothing that at these meetings, Himmler and his lieutenants, Fegelein and Kaltenbrunner, were present. Lord, they were not there to discuss U-boats or the use of battleships. It is clear in my submission from this document that this defendant knew all about concentration camps and concentration camp labor. And as one of the rulers of Germany, he must bear his full share of that responsibility. Lord, I pass to the last document, D650, which I put in as GB 212. Now, this contains the orders issued by the defendant in April. The document in my submission shows the defendants fanatical adherence to the Nazi creed, and his preparedness even at that stage to continue a hopeless war at the expense of human life and with the certainty of increased destruction and misery to the men, women, and children of his country. Lord, I read the last paragraph on the second page. I therefore demand of the commanding officers of the Navy that they clearly and unambiguously follow the path of military duty, whatever may happen. I demand of them that they stamp out ruthlessly all signs and tendencies among the men which endanger the following of this path. Then he refers to an order. I demand from senior commanders that they should take just as ruthless action against any commander who does not do his military duty. If a commander does not think he has the moral strength to occupy his position as a leader in this sense, he must report this immediately. He will then be used as a soldier in this fateful struggle in some position in which he is not burdened with any tasks as a leader. And then the last paragraph on that page, from a further order of the 19th of April, he gives an example of the type of under-officer who should be promoted. An example. In a prison camp of the auxiliary cruiser Phillimore in Australia, a petty officer acting as camp senior officer had all communists who made themselves noticeable among the inmates of the camp systematically done away with in such a way that the guards did not notice. This petty officer is sure of my full recognition for his decision and his execution. After his return, I shall promote him with all means, as he has shown that he is fitted to be a leader. Oh, my Lord, of course, the point is not whether the facts were true or not, but the type of order that he was issuing. Lord, if I might just sum up. The defendant was no plain sailor playing the part of a service officer loyally obedient to the orders of the government of the day. He was an extreme Nazi who did his utmost to indoctrinate the Navy and the German people with the Nazi creed. It is no coincidence that it was he who was chosen to succeed Hitler. Not Goering, not Ribbentrop, not Goebbels, not Himmler. He played a big part in fashioning the U-boat fleet, one of the most deadly weapons of aggressive war. He helped to plan and execute aggressive war. And we cannot doubt that he knew well that these wars were in deliberate violation of treaties. He was ready to stoop to any ruse where he thought he would not be found out. Breaches of the Geneva Convention, or of neutrality where you might hope to maintain that sinking was due to a mine. he was ready to order, and did order, the murder of helpless survivors of sunken ships. An action only paralleled by that of his Japanese ally. Lord, there can be few countries where widows or parents do not mourn for men of the merchant navies whose destruction was due to the callous brutality with which, at the orders of this man, the German U-boats did their work.